See you all made it this morning. I'm Chester, and I would like to welcome to the stage Kathy Wang and Steve Brant from Splunk. They're going to be giving our first presentation this morning, leveraging PassiveDNS for network defense.
All right, so wow, you guys are the industrious ones, right? You're here at 9 in the morning after last night. Really glad to see you. I'm Kathy Wang, and I'll be talking to you today along with my colleague Steve about the PassiveDNS analysis and tool. So I work at Splunk, but as my past is I was a defense contractor for a number of years working in different environments, and I'm also a former CISO in a tech company, so I have a lot of malware detection and response experience and also working in different security operations environments. So this work came from my experiences in the past where I felt like I really could use a tool to do my job in incident response and threat intel analysis and triaging a whole lot better. So that's what I'm hoping to deliver to you guys today. I'll also ask Steve to introduce himself.
Steve Brant. I also work for Splunk. Been in the IT industry a little over 23 years, I guess. It's kind of fortuitous. Kathy was looking at DNS for this, and a colleague of mine and myself did a little research and a talk last year on this, specifically on DNS exfiltration. So it was a perfect match for this.
Okay, so before I proceed, can you guys all hear me okay? All right, people in the back, yeah? Okay, great, thank you. All right, so what I'm hoping that you'll take away from the talk today is a better understanding of threat intel triaging, what the current problems are, and also why is it important, right? So how many people here actually do threat intel work and triaging? Okay, a few of you, great. So for the rest of you, I'd like you to totally understand why this is an important part of the incident response and forensics process. Okay, so we'll talk about some of the gaps that are in threat intel triaging today, and also why we need internal passive DNS sensors. How will that improve the visibility of your threat intel triaging? We'll talk about our solution and approach, and then we'll, kind of show you how the workflow can be easier for you with the tool. So we've got a lot of material to cover in the next 28 minutes or so. So I would prefer if you leave the questions for the end. Thank you. All right, so in terms of threat intel, I've been doing this kind of work for a while, and people want to share threat intel data. However, they're still not able to do it very well today, and that's mainly because there's not consistent format for sharing that they can access easily and also automate. Automation is key to this whole thing because there's so much data coming into the network that you have to analyze that almost no one has adequate staffing to do it. So, we need a lot more tools to help make this happen in a more automated way. And also we all do a lot better when we have visual capabilities that allow us to see at a quick glance what the situation is, right? I mean, it's better to do that than to get a whole list of a table of things to read through. That's just how we work. We do a lot better when there's good visual representation of the situation. So why is threat intel important? I mean, you guys are all here, right? You should know this. Everyone's a target now. There isn't a single industry sector that hasn't been targeted by attacks, sophisticated attacks as well. So it doesn't matter what you're looking at, whether it's healthcare, financial sector, or government or whatever, everyone's highly targeted. So it's very important to continue to do the threat intel triaging work and also to automate it and make it better. So we all know external attacks are increasing, right? So, we have your insider threat issues that go on, sure, but then the bulk of the attacks are going to be from external to the network. And on the other side of it, nation-state attacks are also increasing, right? They're certainly not going away, and they're just getting more and more sophisticated and more difficult to detect and respond to, and also remediate. So all of those factors together make it very, very important that we do good threat intel triaging and sharing of that information with peers in the industry sector so that we can more effectively fight against this type of attack. So looking at this diagram, you can see that most organizations detect breaches in their network months after the breach, not days, not hours, right? Not even weeks, but months. So what does that say about the current state of how people are able to automate workflows? It's not very good, right? It's not a great picture. So everyone wants to share information and do better at detecting these breaches and shorten that amount of time that the attack actually has a chance to do further damage in the network and spread further. However, how do we do that, right? So that kind of segues well into the workflow for threat intel right now. So we have the ability to discover threats, right? Visualize and model the threats, and also translate them in some sort of shareable format. And then we extract the IOCs, right, from that, and then we share all of that information with our peers, and then we do something to try to proactively or remediate the issue. Well, if you look at how well automated this entire workflow process is, you'll see that some of these pieces can be automated, and some of these pieces cannot be automated. So, for example, visualize or model the threat. That is extremely hard to automate. So you have these threat intel analysts that do a lot of work around this, and this is what they spend the bulk of their time on. But there are other pieces in this workflow, such as translating the models into shareable formats in an automated way, that there's currently not a good set of tools to do that. Okay, so this is where the gap really is, in my experience. So what are we going to really cover today in the talk? So now you have a better understanding of threat intel triaging, how that works, what the workflow looks like, what needs more work, what the gaps are. So today we're going to talk about how to obtain better visibility of the malicious domains that have accessed your network. Okay, so what we're not going to do today is talk about visualization, sharing, automation, so this is an area that I feel like visibility, getting more of that is very important, because ultimately it's going to help you put together a much better picture of what happened in your environment, and also share that information with your peers. So what do we need to increase visibility right now? We all know that when we get attacked with a malicious domain in our network, some of our endpoints will reach out and communicate with C2 servers, right? These are malicious servers, and these servers are ephemeral, right? These domains go away very, very quickly. How do we capture that information? Right now, a lot of our threat intel analysts have access to services like Farsight or PassiveTotal that set up public DNS sensors throughout the internet, right? And by accessing that service, they can do a search for a particular malicious domain in their database to see if it comes up and figure out what to do next with that. Get the information about where else that domain has also attacked, for example. And I'm going to show you, since many of us are visual learners, I'm going to show you a diagram shortly on how this works. So what we're looking for is more visibility inside our own network. And I'll show you, this will be clear in a minute, why that's important. But that's what we're missing right now, that visibility inside our network. It's very difficult for a threat intel analyst with limited information about the malicious domains that have been accessed by the endpoints inside their own network to put together a comprehensive picture of how the attack was staged and how it worked, right? So part of the reason why they need to do that is because they're ultimately trying to better understand the tactics and procedures, the TTPs that are used by the attacker in actually attacking their network, and trying to attribute perhaps who the attacker may be, and also at the same time share that data with their peers. But they do lack visibility, total visibility. They have partial visibility. So if we can build like a lightweight, local passive DNS sensor on our own network, we're going to gain additional visibility in addition to the public DNS sensor information that we never really had before. And we'll show you how we did that. All right, so here is a diagram, right? Let's say that our organization is organization 1 in the lower right-hand corner. We have had several endpoints in our organization, which I've denoted by the white circles inside, attacked by the attacker infrastructure's nodes. Okay, so a couple of nodes in the attacker infrastructure attacked endpoints in our organization 1 network. When we go and look at the public DNS sensor database for that information about the malicious domain, we'll see, okay, there was information that it can show us about one of the endpoints in our organization, but there were a couple of other endpoints in our organization that also were attacked by the same infrastructure. However, because the sensor, the public sensor, wasn't in those network segments, we didn't get that picture, right? But if we have PDNS, which is a local passive DNS sensor in our own network, we see all of those different attacks against our endpoints. I've had people ask me, is this meant to replace public DNS sensors? And the answer to that is no, because you get additional visibility, additional information, but you really still need that public sensor database access so you can see that organization 2 in the upper right, which is a peer in our industry sector, also got attacked by the same infrastructure. So now, as an analyst, you're putting together a table with all of this information, right? And that's what you're going to use to triage and further do the threat intel. All right, so what is an analyst building? I mean, if you're a threat intel analyst and you're triaging and you're trying to attribute attacks and trying to build a picture of how the attack took place in your infrastructure, hopefully you're building something like this, where you have, okay, on the public passive DNS sensor side, on your left side, you see the domains that actually, the attack came from. And you see the IP addresses of what they are. Now, on the local private DNS sensor, passive DNS sensor side, on your right, you see your information specific to your network. So you're putting together all this information, and that's going to help you build that visual graph of how the attacks propagated. Now, what I'm going to do next is take that same diagram and label it with these domains that you see here, right, to give you a better idea of what that looks like visually. So, so far we've talked about why this is important to have an internal sensor. It gives you that additional visibility. What I'm also going to show you is that, hold on. All right, so when an endpoint host gets compromised by an attack, I'll give you one example here where public DNS sensors and private internal passive DNS sensors can work together to give you a better picture of the attack. The endpoint host went and visited a website like CNN. And in doing so, there were a couple of ads that rendered on the website. One of the ads had malicious content embedded in it. So it was kind of more of a drive-by situation where the malware compromised the endpoint host from that. At that point, right, there's payloads that are sent over to the endpoint host, and there's communications with the exploit server. But it's a multi-stage attack. It's not a very simple attack, right? It's multi-stage. So at that point, eventually there's activity to persist on that endpoint host, and there's also callback activity that occurs to a C2 server. From a public passive DNS sensor standpoint, you see all the check marks, the green check marks. That's what that would see, and that's what they would have in their database. However, the staging for the attacks, the latter stages, would not be seen by that public DNS sensor because it is originated from your own endpoint sensor host. So having your own internal passive DNS sensor would allow you to see all of that activity. So think of it as complementary to public passive DNS sensors. I hope this makes it a lot more clear on why it's important to have your own internal sensor. So in building this tool, we thought about, obviously requirements, and looking at those requirements and thinking about what do we need to do to make this usable but not heavyweight, right? So, if you wanted heavyweight, you could access your full packet capture solution, and you could look up the timestamps, you could dig into the packet capture, you could look for the content, but that's kind of overkill for what we're trying to do here, which is quickly triaging the activity that occurred. And so what we want is a more lightweight sensor that we can access quickly, that would allow us to quickly drill down through the activity and the DNS queries made by the endpoint and figure out how we're going to triage this very quickly, right? So we need some sort of a middle ground between a public DNS sensor and some sort of heavyweight full packet capture solution. So we came up with this. And now Steve is going to talk about the tools.
So, as Kathy mentioned, we wanted to put together a tool to sort of aggregate all the DNS data and be able to sort of quickly determine if there's something nefarious with the system, or also to be able to drill down to see what the history has been on a particular DNS resolution or a particular DNS traffic. So we decided to do this on Splunk. Seemed like the right thing to do since we work there and have all the tools at our disposal. So given my experience before with looking at exfiltration through DNS, and with Kathy's experience, we put together right now it's a relatively simple app to aggregate all this. So we see, basically the volume of traffic going across, the number of clients making requests to a particular DNS site. And what we use to gather this data is a tool from Splunk called Stream. Splunk made an acquisition several years ago of a company that does network data gathering. And rather than full packet capture, what this does is it actually just pulls in the metadata for a number of different protocols, DNS being one of the big ones. And so we've got, dates queries were made, we've got the answers to the queries, we've got the queries themselves, quite a bit of data in there. Again, it's just the metadata, so not huge volumes of data that you would typically see for a full packet capture solution. Now, we use Stream just for testing, but the way the app is written, there was actually a fair amount of work on the back end for normalizing different types of data. So you could use anything from Stream to Bro. If you use Bro, you could use Gigamon. So there's commercial solutions that'll feed into this as well. You could even use TCP dump if you wanted to parse out that data to put in there. Again, I just talked about the inputs, but yeah, there's multiple paths you can take here. Outputs. So this is we're going to talk a little bit about the front end of the app here. These are the initial ideas that we came up with for aggregating the data. These are just sort of the mock-ups. So looking at dates that transactions took place, and we've also got a lookup in there so you can quickly see if any malicious domains have been accessed. In addition to that, we're showing, aggregate the counts of unique IPs that are coming from the destination, all indicators that, potentially indicators that there might be something going on. There's drill down at each level, so we can actually select an aggregated list and eventually drill down to each individual query that took place over a given time period. And of course, all throughout, you see any blacklisted domains. You eventually get down to the actual raw data that came in, via the sensor. So these are some screenshots of the actual app itself as it is now. You can see that you've got number of queries at the top, the number of distinct answers, potentially all indicators. So in doing the testing with exfiltration, you can definitely see anything that's going out as base 32 as part of the domain name, or not the domain name, but the host name, tends to notch up these, not the distinct answers, but the actual number of queries, the unique subdomains or host names that are coming up. We've also got a visual diagram here of the different query types. So whether they're A records or TXT records for DNS, you can see sort of a timeline here pretty quickly and drill down on that. And then, upon drill down, like I said, you have the aggregated list that you start out with, and then as you sort of click through these, you drill down to the more detailed information around the clients, the number of answers that were sent back for the query. And ultimately, you get down this lower right-hand corner shows each individual query that went out. And by drilling down on that, like I said before, you get the raw data. So future features, we're actually working on version 2 now. Version 1 is fairly Spartan. Like I said, a lot of it was work on the back end to make it compatible with different sources. We've talked to several vendors that want to public DNS or public passive DNS vendors that want to integrate, and we're also talking about some different visualizations on the app, just more high-level indicators that are easy to track down with the eye. And that's about it. This is all free app. Encourage you to download it and try it out. Our reward is your good feedback and use. And this is where you can actually download the app from. Splunk Base is a community site for Splunk where people can upload apps. Again, it's free. You can download Splunk for free as well and run it on there. There's no restriction. And again, Stream is free as well. So I got started on this just trying it out at home. It's a perfectly valid way to do that. So, and that is about it.
Right.
We have time for questions.
Questions?
Yeah, we have time for questions. Is anybody looking around here to see if anybody has any questions?
No questions?
Not seeing any. Well, I have questions. I'm curious, looking at the data that you gather with the tool. I was actually, so at DEF CON, Paul Vixie was scheduled to give a presentation looking at some interesting sets of DNS queries that he was seeing using data that his organization was collecting. And what was kind of interesting to me was sort of trying to figure out, how to identify the interesting DNS queries as part of this pool, right? When you look at a set of endpoints at a customer or an organization, you've got typically a really long tail of small numbers of lookups, but those are where you're most likely to find, say, C2, queries going after these random domain names that are being generated and that kind of thing. Do you have any advice for people that are collecting this data using PassiveDNS, like how to find the gold, how to find the needle in the haystack, if you will?
Periodicity is one thing, so just looking for anything that appears to be beaconing out, and that's actually we've got some spark lines on some of the tables in there showing, so it's a little easier to see periodicity. The other thing is, if you filter out content providers, so you can generally get rid of a lot of the legitimate ones, but just the length of the query itself. Content providers tend to have very, very lengthy domain names, subdomains. But yeah, that's another indicator right there of the interesting query is something I would want to look at as something of a very long DNS name.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be a good way of identifying endpoints that are infected potentially, because obviously there's a lot of DNS activity there. And I also was kind of intrigued at the beginning. You talked about not being a lot of good standards for threat intel sharing, Kathy. And when I looked at that, I always questioned that myself, going, well, what is the reason behind that? Like, is it that we don't actually know what's useful to share, or is it that we just haven't gotten together and agreed upon a format? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So there's a lot of different format standards out there. There's the Styx taxi, there's OpenIOC, there's a lot of different formats out there. One of the problems is that as an industry, we can't all agree on one format to use, right? So that's also part of the problem, is none of those are, the overwhelmingly #1 used format. People like to use whatever they like to use. The other problem is that in many of the security operations and threat intel groups, we're short-staffed. So there's a lot of data coming in, but not enough people to look at them. So that's the other issue. The third issue is our willingness to share, right? We still have in the threat intel community that know, met, and trust kind of verification system going on, and that will naturally limit the amount of people that will be able to access shareable information as well. So there's a lot of different factors that are preventing us from doing a better job with sharing this data. That's been my experience.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Or if not, if we can have a round of applause and thank Kathy and Steve for their presentation.